One of the reasons I enjoy Lovecraftian magic is that it frees you a great deal from the gatekeeping and ego posturing of theistic practitioners, or the need for historical or cultural accuracy on a lot of levels. By comparison, there's a lot of gatekeeping and theistic dogma attached to most of the other pantheons available to us. Similarly, this is one reason why I find demons so appealing, is there's less cultural attachment going on. While of course, cults of people do appear and reappear of people who have dogmatic opinions about King Paimon or Belial, all with their own collectively accepted mythology about them, things that if you don't say or do right, they're going to kind of give you some grief about it. But generally, these people are less common, and there's a lot less gatekeeping and a lot less limitation going on. When people go into demonolatry, of course, as I said, there's cults relating to it, but most people are expected to have their own experiences and find their own gnosis. And the umbrella that contains all of this is much bigger, and it's much harder to say the wrong things in those groups. Not so much when you go to some other pantheons. I think that the element of cultism, in other words, and I shouldn't even just say call it, the element of sort of gatekeeping and dogma is a lot stronger in other pantheons, like, you're talking about Zeus or Thor or the Morrigan or whatever. I mean, yes, the occasional true believer or zealot emerges in every community, and that is undeniable. But in the Goetic pantheon, for example, they tend to burn out quickly. People don't approve of them, and they don't really last long, so they kind of go away. And if they do have an influence, it's temporal. It's not necessarily very strong. And so demons are always kind of on my menu. Even if I'm kind of bored of the Goetic ones, the darker spirits tend to always be of interest. And, no one can really get all offended, like you're somehow disrespecting their culture or race or heritage if you work with the Goetic spirit. You can do it completely different from someone else's dogmatic expectation. You don't get excommunicated, And this goes double for Lovecraft, except you get into a different kind of problem with Lovecraft, because everybody sort of sees Lovecraft as made up bullshit. So there's less gatekeeping going on. They're like, well, it's made up, so do whatever you want with it. And so there's less people trying to plant their ancestral ego flag all over the practice and say, this belongs to my people, how dare you misrepresent it. The irony is, to me, and one of the reasons I also love the Lovecraftian magical system, Lovecraftian current, is because Lovecraft's fiction delves deep into the same archetypes of spirituality and metaphysics and human psyche and consciousness that all gods and demons do. And, it lingers and stays with us in this primordial way. Like, we know somehow in our primordial soul that there's something about these things that are scary, terrifying, weird. And of course, there's a lot of people who don't resonate with it at all, and they just think it's silly. But those of us who remotely get it, find it interesting and exciting and weird, and it's a little bit spooky and scary and all those kind of good things. We all kind of intuitively know there's something diabolically accurate about his cosmic horror. As impossible as monsters like Cthulhu or Yog-Sothoth are, they're built out of monstrous archetypes our subconscious completely recognizes without having to have a lot of prompting. We can all recognize that strange shape in the dark, that we know is the unknown and is terrifying to us. So while it would be unfair to draw too many direct lines between any particular gods or demons to the pantheon of Lovecraft and his mythos, it's also clear that these archetypes are shared as their inspiration. Maybe a little bit harder to see if you're not really familiar with them, because, how can you draw a correlation between, an octopus-headed dragon and what in our culture can we draw a correspondence? How does Nyarlathotep relate to us and our world at all? How does Yog-Sothoth relate at all? Because we kind of get hung up on the imagery of these beings and ignore the archetype that spawns the imagery, why they're put together, and so on. And I've come to see, as sort of an aside to sort of preface this, I've come to see all spiritual beings, including ourselves, as filtered expressions of archetypal sources. That is to say, these archetypal ideas are filtered expressions of cosmic source consciousness. That is to say, there is your individual limited consciousness that you feel and see, that is what you think you are. There is the collective conscious that is bigger and bigger and bigger, moving outward from your personal collective to your family collective, to your city collective, your nation collective, to the planetary collective of humanity. And it's a shared collective. And the Jungian archetypal theory is at play here. And there's things that are kind of recognizable to all human beings in an archetypal way. And then there is cosmic archetypes, and one might call them principles too. You might call them principles if you don't see them as conscious in any way. So these archetypes, you know, as you decentralize the focus of their relationship, you know, archetypes have a personal relationship to us, and the less we're focused on us as a little old me and start seeing us as a planet or a star system or a galaxy, cosmic archetypes change in scope and in vastness. Well, there are cosmic archetypes that are probably universal, at least to anything that has any kind of experience remotely similar to a human being. Things like fear and love or lust or whatever are pretty common probably throughout all the known universes, right? So these are cosmic archetypes, and some are human-centric, and those are less cosmic, but some are cosmic but also human. There's a human version of it that we understand. So, you know, these things kind of filter through our cultures and our experiences, and we create, you know, pantheons of gods around them. And we even do this with our own personal lives. We kind of take our experiences and we create masks for these experiences, these archetypal experiences. You know, some of us are warriors, some of us are poets, some of us are, and we have these different roles in our consciousness. And we can even use the Jungian version of the archetypes. You know, you have the rebel, like outlaw, the hero, the wise man, the wizard, or whatever it is. And there's all these different archetypes, and they're pretty universal in our human culture. You can find them everywhere. So we express those things, and no one is one archetype only. Everyone's a sort of a bunch of different archetypes, kind of. And there's a lot of change that happens. You know, archetypes can cycle into each other. You know, the archetype of one can become the archetype of another as a natural evolution kind of thing. I don't want to get too much into Jungian archetypes. The point is that there's these archetypal things that are common in human consciousness, and we hang godlike masks on them that we can call egregores. And we're no different. You and I are egregores, which we hang upon this story that we think we are, which is a story that's based on the same archetypes, and our bodies are the idol for that egregore. Our bodies are the idol, just like a I don't know, I don't have one with me. A statue of Zeus is an idol for that archetype, for that consciousness. So the Lovecraftian pantheon is the same archetypes we see elsewhere. You know, but the thing is that archetypes are filtered through experience. They're filtered through culture. They're filtered through your personal experience. And Lovecraft saw the same archetypes we do. It'd be a silly argument to say he didn't. He saw the same archetypes we do. And so what happens is those archetypes get filtered through his perspective. And in his, you know, just like the Goetic spirits, just like the Goetia are gods seen through a Christian filter, Lovecraft saw these archetypes through his filter. And the Christian filter for demons is a shadow. It's the shadow of their fears of morality and sin and all that stuff. So the gods of other cultures were turned into demons because they were passed through that filter of their collective shadow of Christianity. Lovecraft had his own shadows. His shadows were quite pronounced. He was a tormented soul. He had a horrible life. His mother was horrible to him. He was a complete and utter. He was probably abused. There's probably all this other stuff. So it's actually amazing he wasn't like some kind of a psychopath that was killing people and shit. He had a very bad life. Like, people give him a lot of flack for his xenophobia and racism and stuff. And, fair enough. I mean, he was racist even for the time that he lived. But, let's understand where that comes from. I mean, the guy was raised to be a shut-in. He was raised in an overly protective situation with an overbearing mother. His wife and him had problems, and it was only later in life that he realized that he was wrong about some of those things. He became a little bit more aware of his bigotry and took steps to maybe do something about that. Very minor ones, of course. So, but we have to understand he came from a perspective that was of someone who had a very unhappy life, and so the world was terrifying to him. He didn't see a lot of joy in the world the way someone who had maybe a loving and happy upbringing might have. He was scared of the world. He had some sort of agoraphobia, probably, certainly xenophobia. And so the strange and the unknown and the alien was terrifying to him. And so when he passed these archetypal truths through his consciousness, the filter created these monstrous masks for things that other people maybe saw as beautiful. So, let's see if we can give you an example here. I wrote some of this stuff down, but let's see. So the Lovecraftian entities are, of course, egregores. They are not themselves real. So when we think about Nyarlathotep or Azathoth or Yog-Sothoth or Shub-Niggurath or any number of the wacky, scary shit that's in the Lovecraftian mythos, the Haunter in the Dark, all of that stuff, they are not literal beings. And in fact, one of the problems I have with many theistic followers today and superstitious people is they're really no different than biblical creationists who think the Bible is literal truth, that the world is only about 6,000 years old and was created by the snap of the fingers of a God that, whatever, that can't even protect one of his churches from a lightning strike. This idea that gods are literally real is absurd, but that doesn't mean they're not real in the spiritual sense. And this is something that people have to wrap their heads around to properly understand theurgy and magic as I understand it, is instead of seeing, the gods as like flesh and blood, literal beings, like Zeus is living on Mount Olympus and he can come here and make lightning bolts and stuff like that, we need to recognize them as living archetypes, living conscious beings, but they're disembodied. They don't have a body to center on. They're non-local in their consciousness. Their identity is a collective amalgamation. It is not, unlike you and I who believe we are somehow unique and self-originating. The reality is we are a construct of stories as well. The stories that our family told us growing up are the same stories we tell ourselves today, and they kind of self-repeat and they become our truth. And in the same way that you are a construct of a collective of people telling you who you are and your relationship to that and them, the gods are no different. They are a construct of what everybody in the world says and sees about them, and then they have a relationship to that. Clearly, they influence our world. They are living things. They're just non-local and not centered on a biological body. Their body is our collective body. Everybody in the planet who thinks about Superman is literally the body of Superman at that moment. And in much the same way that your cells are you, but only temporarily because they die and come and go and all kinds of stuff. You are temporarily part of the body of this enigmatic entity that we would say is egregoric, these gods that exist. And Lovecraft's gods are no different. And they are actually very potent because they are also, you can draw a very, not direct, but very loose parallel to the gods of other cultures. There's actually some very accurate comparisons you can make if you pass them through the filter of cosmic horror and fear that Lovecraft crafted them with. Lovecraft crafted, yeah, I like that. So I had some examples written down here. So let's see here. Let's see Azathoth, for example. I see Azathoth as a mask for a similar archetype. That is, it's an egregoric mask that is similar to Brahman or chaos. So Brahman would be from the Hindu, Vedic tradition. It is the word for all that is. And it's basically similar to chaos from the Hellenistic perspective. But the mask is darker, more terrifying, more in tune with madness and nihilistic cosmic fear. It's not a divine or just mysterious thing. It is terrifying. And because the terrifying significance of Azathoth is that, you see, Azathoth is the blind idiot god that is dreaming the reality that we exist in. We exist as a dream in Azathoth's, dream. We're a figment of his imagination, basically. And Azathoth is kept dreaming by these cosmic entities that are playing flutes for him. And one could argue that he has also created those flute-playing monsters to keep him entertained and sleeping. It goes back to, I don't remember which culture it is, but I'm pretty sure it's some Asian Buddhist thing, or maybe it was just in some movie I saw, where the idea is that there's these monks that are constantly telling the stories, and someone always must continue telling the story, and if they stop, then the universe ends. And the theory is that the idea in Lovecraft's mythos is that Azathoth is dreaming the reality of this world, and if it wakes up, everything goes away. It's all vanishes, because Azathoth itself is a mindless idiot god. It's blind, it's dumb, it can't think. It itself has no mind at all whatsoever. It is literally the emptiness in which all things happen. And if it wakes up, if the dream ends, then we go away. And that's liberating to maybe a Buddhist, but terrifying to Lovecraft, because Lovecraft saw that as an existential dread. I go away if I stop thinking about myself, if this dream ends. Maybe he didn't put those two things together intentionally. Maybe Lovecraft had no idea that that's what he was doing, or maybe he did. He was quite familiar with anthropology at the time, of cultural stuff, even though he saw a lot of it as scary and bad in his own bigoted way. But he was familiar with it. I mean, this was a period when all the Egyptology stuff was taking off. So of course half of his deities have, names that remind you of Egyptian things like Thoth and Hotep and all of these things. So of course there's some connection there in his mind. It would be like I don't know. It was just something that was in the collective conscious at the time. He was very aware of it. So of course he based it on that a little bit. So Azathoth is like Brahman or chaos, but more in tune with the madness and nihilistic cosmic fear that we are ultimately utterly insignificant and exist only within the dreams of this blind idiot god that could wake up and we vanish immediately. But we can even expand this further and say, if we look around in various, metaphysical thinking or spiritual thinking outside of just that, we have the Logos of Plato. I already mentioned the Brahman. You have Shehina from rabbinical, Kabbalistic stuff. You have the void of Buddhism, chaos and Hellenistic myth, and so many other primordial origins that correlate very loosely or sometimes very directly to Azathoth. So don't let the imagery Lovecraft used fool you, okay? He is very much invoking the same archetype that all of these other things are invoking, whether they be personified, because the Logos is not personified, and the Brahman is not specifically personified, unless we talk about the Brahma, then it becomes personified in some way. The Brahman itself is not, and Azathoth is not so easily personified because it is a blind idiot god. It's an amorphous thing. It doesn't have definition. It can't be described. It's maddeningly grotesque. It doesn't make sense. It's pure chaos in action and motion and in existence. So again, what's the problem here? This is why I kind of laugh and scoff when learned occultists scoff at Lovecraftianism or Yog-Sothothery or something like that. It's like you are scoffing at the mask because you're saying it's not real because some bigot created it, was very creative and made amazing stories. You're scoffing because you think somebody made it up. And I would argue that everything that you're working with, especially if you're theistic on that side of magic, you're working with things that are equally just as made up. They're made up as masks, however, so that humans can personify and have a relationship with something that is alien but still aware, still conscious, still a truth of your being. It is still a major component of what you are. It is no less real just because it's made up. It's just that what is made up is clothing. It's a mask. It's a thing that something that is unexplainable can wear. It's like algebra. You know, when you don't know a quantity, you put a value over it that's like A plus B type of thing. Zeus is like A, and you know, Hades is like B, and you know, all that stuff. You know, you could do all of that. That's just, it's like a form of algebra. It's symbolism. That's what symbolism is. That's what it all is. These are masks that concepts and principles, the Logos, wears. Okay, so we can do this with most, if not all, pretty much every Lovecraftian entity is some archetypal or some compound archetype that we can recognize. You know, if you go to Yog-Sothoth, so Yog-Sothoth is the all-powerful, omniscient, omnipotent side of the dream. It's a figment of the dream. It is absolutely not more real than Azathoth. It would be like the demiurge if we were talking about the Gnostic tradition. That's what Yog-Sothoth is. You might as well call it the demiurge. It's the demiurge of Lovecraftian mythos. And it has all the power and same, you know, role as a demiurge might have, both good and bad. You know, when we say good, of course, there is, of course, the principle that the demiurge is really kind of evil, but it still does good things. You know, it's not that it can't do anything good. It's just that it's misguided, perhaps, or it's outright evil, depending upon which version of that, you know, do you see? Is it just the demiurge? Is it Sophia? Whatever. So Yog-Sothoth is the equivalent of that. One could also say that maybe there's some connection to Yahweh. There's some connection maybe to Vishnu. It's like the shadow of Vishnu or something, where Vishnu is like the protector and Yog-Sothoth is maybe less protective. You know, maybe more of just a cosmic horror. But of course, Yog-Sothoth would be that demiurge seen through the eye of madness and horror once again, because Yog-Sothoth is never represented as a hero or a good guy, but an enigmatic, anything goes, can do evil or good kind of entity. And I like Yog-Sothoth. It's a cool being, actually. It's a really cool myth. Then you have Nyarlathotep, which is a little bit more enigmatic than all of them, because there's nothing that is clearly obvious, like, oh, this is the principle of the Logos, and this is the principle of the divine dividend, you know. No, Nyarlathotep is called the soul of the outer gods. And one could argue that Nyarlathotep is the Russian nesting doll of the Atman. It is a never-ending, ever-increasingly, it's the embodiment of the divine. It would be like the Jesus character or the Satan or Antichrist character from maybe Western mythology, is what it would be. I've called it, and I've heard him called an alien Satan, right? That he's kind of like an alien adversary, and that's fair, you know, I suppose, because he's particularly in Lovecraft's lore. He is clearly based, at least his egregore is based loosely on Tesla and the madness of science of the period that Lovecraft was coming up in. And he was almost like, you know, imagine an infinite entity having an avatar that was there to just be like the ultimate, you know, shit kicker, pot stirrer, revealer of the mythos, right? So he could be seen as a Loki, he could be seen as a Satan or a Lucifer, but he could also be seen as a messianic figure, because if your perspective is one of cosmic chaos, then and cosmic disorder and horror, then he's actually doing the divine work. He's doing God's will, if you will. He is saving the universe from order, or should we say from the madness of sanity. You know, I love the juxtaposition of opposites like that. So Nyarlathotep is an archetypal figure as well, and we can draw a correlation. And just like in our mythologies of our modern mythologies of Christianity and whatever, you know, we have this understanding. Let's say you talk to a Christian, and if we're going to talk to them about God, what is more relatable? God the Father, God the Holy Spirit, or God the Son? Well, God the Son is the most relatable one. That's the one that everyone wants to talk to, because that's the one that will talk to you. Of course, they're seen as the same thing, but it's seen as the personification of all those things, the human incarnation of those things. Well, that's Nyarlathotep, is the human incarnation, or the human-like incarnation, the embodied personification, the avatar of the divine. It is God the Son, whereas Yog-Sothoth might be God the Father, and Azathoth might be God the Spirit. And that is why Lovecraftian Yog-Sothothery works potently for those who are willing to look at those masks as valid in some way. If people are willing to open up to those masks and not poo-poo them and see them as silly and just science fiction or something, it'll work. It'll work really well. And you can even do Shub-Niggurath as this is the feminine element of fertility gone mad and crazy, because not everything in nature is aesthetically pleasing to us, and not everything in nature is polite and kind. You know, the problem with the love and light crowd is they see nature as this, it's always beautiful, and it is. I'm not saying that's wrong, but they see it in a love and light kind of way, where it's like, oh, it's still lovely that, you know, I get it. It's still kind of sweet. And I don't want to be a hater for that, because I kind of see it the same way. But I embrace that dark side of that beauty too. You know, some people will look at the face of a spider and cringe. And I look at the face of a spider and go, ooh, look at that. That's beautiful. Look at how that works. Look at the mandibles. Look at the eyes. Look at it. Look, you can see that there's a living thing in there. It's amazing. And look at how it's eating that fly. Look at the fly is beautiful. Look at those eyes. It's glorious. The mouth is glorious. Look at how it functions. I don't see ugliness in it as readily as other people do. So the people who find the Lovecraftian current beautiful are just like me. They're people who can look at the supposedly ugly and find beauty in it. Anyway, you know, and find something in the grotesque that is not grotesque anymore. That's not to say that there's nothing that'll turn my stomach, I suppose, but it's to say that my sense of beauty is different in that way, that I don't find traditionally ugly things necessarily as ugly. I do find beautiful things as beautiful, of course, too. So Lovecraft would be that lens of cosmic horror and the shadow of bigotry and the shadow of fear. You know, being the filter through which the divine flows, and that's what Lovecraft saw. So his entities are no less valid as mythology than Zeus or any other. It's just that they're newer. They're newer incarnations. They're newer metaphors. They're newer allegories. So they come with less potency as identified beings. But the archetypes they represent are still primordial in power. And so therefore they're still really potent in magic or in theurgy. They're still really valuable. And if you like the masks that Lovecraft invented, don't shy away from them. Don't be afraid of them. Don't look at them like, oh, these are bullshit because somebody made it up. Because I promise you that if you find the origin of any god, it's going to be somebody made it up somewhere. And that doesn't mean that it's not made up based on an influence. That doesn't mean that so when I say it's made up, that doesn't mean that it didn't, you know, that it is not something that is hung on the bones of something valid. You know, just like any concept is hung upon a phenomenon we've experienced. So we can say that Zeus is not real because Zeus doesn't live on Mount Olympus, and he doesn't have this and that and this and 6 other things. He doesn't have a body, he doesn't have this, all these things that we need are real. But the archetype of Zeus is absolutely relatable and real, and we can encounter that in our lives anytime. And so we might as well personify it, because everything is consciousness. Everything is consciousness. Consciousness, it's not that everything has consciousness. Everything is consciousness. Everything is a manifestation of that consciousness. Everything is an embodiment of that consciousness. Everything is a percolation of that consciousness. Consciousness would be a field, and the beings you see are the ripples in it when something perturbs that field. And that's how you have to see it. Don't deny them. Just don't make them bigger than you. That is to say, don't assume that you are more real or they are more real than you. We're all illusory waves on this field of consciousness. We are all a still pond, and the thoughts are the ripples flowing over it that you know, that we think disturbs the pond. And not accurately true. It's not, you don't have to worry. You remain no matter what. So anyway, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I actually, while I did this, I had an ocular migraine, which is a little bit scary. My left eye went blind while I was doing this. I wonder if when I do the review of the video, my eye's gonna be going all over the place. So I'll have to check this out. Anyway, guys, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you comment, and look into the description of this video for ways you can support my work. I have a class that I run every Monday, which the timing of which is now going to be from 9 p.m. Eastern till about 10:30, 11 p.m. Eastern, depends on how much energy and time we got that night. But they're at least an hour to 2 hours long, and the classes cover everything from chakra and energy work to rituals to everything you can imagine, and they're really good and they're interactive, and hopefully you guys will find that interesting. If you want to join in those classrooms, look on my Patreon page, which is in my Linktree description, and check out the tier that's the $20 live classroom tier. You subscribe to that and everything else will be kind of taken care of. Just make sure you have Discord if you want to participate in the class. Anyway, guys, until next time, this is DH Thorne signing off.